3, 2, 1. Okay, so it's funny that our pre-class discussion and chit-chat was about food, because we're going to be dealing with a very famous food in this Torah portion. I'm hearing an echo myself. I hate hearing my own voice, especially through recordings. So the most famous food that we get during our time in the midbar, in the wilderness. Manna, right. Matzah was before we left, and matzah when we get out the other end. But in the middle, the most famous thing that we're going to eat, which answers that huge question of, we're stuck out there for 40 years. There's no 7-Eleven. What are people eating? And there's not even a Chinese restaurant. So the answer comes in the form of manna.
Manna. That means what's that? What's that? Manna.
So we're going to be looking at what the manna meant more than what the manna was. Previous classes, we've discussed the possible candidates for what manna would have been from a biological point of view and all of that. If you don't remember that, you're going to have to go check the YouTube archives. But we're going to look more at what the manna meant. Why did God give us manna? Not the only way that we could have been sustained. And even having chosen to give us manna, the way the manna was given, this choice of how the manna should be delivered to the people who need it. First, we got to do the work, got to find out what the Torah says, and then we're going to listen to our commentators and see not just how manna affected them, but how manna is still relevant to us. That may be a hard sell, but I'm going to give it a shot. Page 414, we are in Parashat Beshallach, chapter 16.
This one?
We're going to start with the first pasuk, yes, the first verse. It's of course most famous for the Song of the Sea, Shirat Hayam, for the parting as we left Egypt, when we all sang and were happy, and then immediately begin complaining. So we're going to be dealing with the complaint section. I'm sorry, if you want to have the fun part, well, come to services and you'll hear it chanted beautifully, but you're just going to have to put up with the complaints. After all, if Moses and God could, so can we.
Okay. Setting out from Elim, the whole Israelite community came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departure from the land of Egypt. The whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to starve this whole congregation to death."
All right. And you're welcome. So they're complaining already, and the complaint is no food. Now, first of all, the no food is a lie, right? We've touched on this before, because is it only a bunch of people walking?
No, they have herds.
They got herds.
They got herds.
Remember, that was an ongoing point of debate with Pharaoh, that when you let us go, you got to let us go with our flocks and herds. They went with their flocks and herds. They've got stuff to eat. On the other hand, what's different between now and what it was like when they were in Egypt?
They had ovens, the ability to let their bread rise because they weren't on the move.
So certainly the bread would have been of the nicer variety. No offense to matzah. They would have had wheat, and certainly their stocks of wheat would have run out by this point, because you can only carry so much ground up wheat, flour on your back for so long before you are eventually going to end up using it all. It's 2.5 months in, exactly. So they probably run out of some of the provisions that they had. That would have been familiar type food. So yes, they could start eating their flocks, but that's probably not going to be something you can live on forever. We're not carnivores. As much as we may enjoy the taste of meat, you can't actually live on it and only it. And even if they did and ate their entire herds and flocks, then what? Right? Then if there's nothing to replenish, they've got nothing else. So the question of eat the fill here may not be that they're hungry. It could just be the question of they're looking at what they've got and they know this is a limited resource. And they know that it is only going down, 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 building up that resource again. Is coming. And that might as well have been left in Egypt if they're just going to starve to death in the desert. So it's not that they're absolutely starving yet, but they are certainly viewing their stockpile of food as a non-sustainable resource.
It's such a negative.
Well, yeah.
They've already given up their homes.
Yeah.
Right.
They've already given up their surroundings. Now they have to give up their diet and their food.
Right.
And they're walking through a desert that's got nothing that they recognize at all, just sand and nothing.
with nothing growing there to eat.
Yeah,
And the one thing a slave knew they could count on was being fed. Because the master had every intention of making sure their slaves didn't starve to death. Occasionally we had to kill a whole bunch of us. But apart from that, if they kept you around to work, they were going to feed you. And indeed, that part of that deal, if you will, is why indentured servitude is something that is still allowed later on in the Torah. Because people who reach that extreme level of poverty, who can't take care of themselves for a whole variety of reasons, could put themselves in the hands of someone else and give over their labor in exchange for a place to live and food to eat. Here, they're looking at saying, we've got our food, but our food's just getting less and less and less. What's going on? Because when we were slaves to them, they took care of us. God, where's the grub? Okay.
And the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread for you from the sky, and the people shall go out and gather each day that day's portion, that I may thus test them to see whether they will follow my instructions or not. Day, when they apportion what they have brought in, it shall prove to be double the amount that they gather each day.
All right, so these are the basic rules. What's God going to be doing?
Raining bread down from the heavens.
Raining bread. We haven't got the word manna yet, right? We've got the word bread. Bread's going to come down just like rain comes down. And what's the cycle? What's the routine going to be?
Every morning.
Okay, right? So we get one per day. That is to say, 1 day's worth each day we will be getting, right? And we will gather. H in there, right? We gather. Those are choices. That is to say, God, being an infinite being of infinite power, can choose to deliver the food however we want. God could have simply said, don't worry, I'm going to put the food in your belly. Right? Intravenous miracle. Right? You don't even need to worry about eating. After all, we know a little bit later on, Moses goes up Mount Sinai for 40 days. He's not eating up there. God can sustain somebody without actually having to eat. Why is he choosing to do it this way? Why is he choosing to make us go out and gather it? Why didn't he put it at the doorway of our tent rather than making us go get it? Why didn't he put it in the pot rather than making us go get it? Why didn't he put it in our stomach, making us go get it? Why do we have to do it once a day? Why not once a week? Why not once a year? Right? These are all choices. God uses the term test. God uses the term test. But there's something special that may be connected to this test. Is it one day's worth per day every day?
Not on the sixth day.
Okay, right. Well, we get 2 on day 6. Right, and why are we getting 2 on day 6? Shabbat, right? That's a mishneh, a double portion of bread. It comes on the 6th day, so we don't need to go gather on the 7th day, because the 7th day is Shabbat, and that's not Shabbat activity. This is the reason, primary reason why we have 2 loaves of challah for our Shabbat meals. Reminder of the double portion that God gave us.
I always wondered, did the animals eat the blood stuff?
There's all sorts of other subtle issues that are happening here. There's no statement that they did, but they had to be eating something in order to survive. So what's that?
They need protein.
Well, it depends on which animals. I mean, most of the animals we had were just herbivores. That's the word I'm looking for. But
But there's no grass to eat.
well, there's not enough grass to support vast flocks, right? The flocks of an entire nation. Even if one shepherd might have been able to do a little, you don't have so much for everyone. And besides, most shepherds of this size, you would have had to move from pasture to pasture to pasture in a fairly narrow area for a long, long time. Not that they know that yet. Remember, we've seen the end of the book. They haven't. Right now, they think they're going to get to Israel any day now. All right, so onward.
So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, by evening you shall know it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall behold the presence of the Lord, because he has heard your grumblings against the Lord. For who are we? Us. Since it is the Lord, Moses continued, who will give you flesh to eat in the evening and bread in the morning to the full, because the Lord has heard the grumblings you utter against him. What is our part? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord.
All right. So, like any good, real conversation, as opposed to carefully crafted press releases, Moses is blending a lot of different issues here as he tries to explain the situation to the nation. That the people need food, and the food's going to be taken care of. But what's that second layer that he seems to be going over and over again?
Don't blame Aaron and me.
Don't blame us.
Yeah.
Right? And notice, why would he have thought that? If you go back into verse 2, they grumbled against whom?
Moses and Aaron.
Exactly. Right. So, and who did they say in verse 3 brought them out of Egypt? Moses and Aaron. Right? So it seemed perfectly natural that that was there, but who actually brought them out of the land of Egypt?
Yes.
Who is actually going to provide for them? So these are not the tour guides that are going to take care of all of your needs on the trip. You know, on your trip to the Holy Land, all your needs will be met by Aaron and Moses. No, on your trip to the Holy Land, all your needs will be met by God. But the most physical representations in the minds of the Israelites are Moses and Aaron, and so that's where they're directing their anger. And Moses is trying to steer them towards God as he responds to them, that when this happens, don't think Moses and Aaron did it. Don't think Moses and Aaron have provided. Think God took care of this. Because, well, this is a test. All right. You okay reading a bit more?
Yeah, I could do a bit more.
Well, I saw your glasses off. I was.
Oh, no, that's okay.
So now we're on 4:16, chapter 16, verse 9.
Then Moses said to Aaron, say to the whole Israelite community, advance toward the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. And as Aaron spoke to the whole Israelite community, they turned toward the wilderness, and there, in a cloud, appeared the presence of the Lord.
All right. We're going to have to deal with that another time, right? So what the cloud and the pillar of fire were is a much deeper discussion, but we're stuck in the grocery department today.
And they all saw something. Okay?
Yes, absolutely.
And the Lord spoke to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Say, by evening you shall eat flesh, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread, and you shall know that I, the Lord, am your God.
All right. So where's all this meat coming from now? Because when we began, they were grumbling, and there was an idea of bread raining from the air, but now we're talking about meat also. Now, this is not so illogical, and it doesn't come out of left field, because what was the phrasing they used for their grumbling way back in like verse 3, which is in English?
The meat, whatever.
The meat pot.
Pot, yeah.
Right. So, which is the lovely, colorful English phrase, the flesh pots. Right, which flesh pot has a totally different connotation in English nowadays. It's much clearer in the Hebrew that they're not talking about the red light district, but they're talking about the actual buckets of meat. Now, whether they actually got buckets worth of meat back in Egypt is highly debatable, but they were complaining about the absence of meat, not just the absence of food. And that's why God, in answering their grumblings, is going to provide meat as well. But the meat is going to be much less interesting than the bread, which is why people always remember the bread. Make sense? Okay, so let's go on in verse 13.
In the evening, quail appeared and covered the camp. In the morning, there was a fall of dew about the camp. When the fall of dew lifted, there, over the surface of the wilderness, lay a fine and flaky substance as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, what is this? For they did not know what it was. That is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as you require to eat, an omer to a person for as many of you as there are. Each of you shall fetch for those in his tent.
All right. So when they came out, after Moses had said there's going to be food, there were birds everywhere. quail, which kosher, very tasty, I understand. Never eaten one myself. And they gathered them up. But there was also, in the morning, this dew that was covering everything, that as it evaporated, there was left behind this substance seen before. And they went to Moses and said, we've never seen this stuff before. And Moses said, that's what you're going to eat. You need to go gather it. Everyone looks so excited about this proposition, right? Don't you want to go eat what you find dripping off of plants?
Not so much.
Look,
No.
it's flaky, crusty plant.
I was hoping for a slice
Goo.
of bread. You get little flakes.
It does have a certain quality to it,
Yeah.
which may be part of the test. Remember, at the beginning, we said that this is all going to be a test. And one of the things the commentators have to wrangle with is, right, was the test... Was the test that they would eat this stuff? Was, it's like a dare. I dare you to eat that. And they would do it. Was the test how they would gather? Or maybe all of them were part of one giant test. So let's just go ahead and read how they gather.
The Israelites did so, some gathering much, some little. But when they measured it by the omer, he who had gathered much and he who had gathered little had no deficiency. They had gathered as much as they needed to eat. And Moses said to them, let no one leave any of it over until morning. But they paid no attention to Moses. Morning. And it became infested with maggots and stank. And Moses was angry with them.
All right, so Moses gave them instructions. They failed. Moses is also going to give them instructions regarding the Shabbos gathering, that you get twice on 6th and nothing on 7th. Some of them go out anyway on the 7th day. And Moses goes, there's not going to be anything there, people, listen. But we're not going to go through that because looking at the clock, we need to hit our commentary, and that should be enough to get us running. Okay, so this manna, seems like a blessing, right? A blessing that isn't what people were expecting. It's like all those old stories where people make a wish to the genie or a wish to a magic fish, and somehow you twist the wish into a way that wasn't expected by the wisher. It's like, we wish we had food, and we wish it would just come from heaven. It's like, all right, fine, here's goop. Okay, I guess that's what I wished for, but it's not quite what I was thinking. It's like, the old, I wish I had all the money in the world. And so you get all the money in the world, and then you can't spend any, because if you spend it, you won't have it. And you go to spend the money, it disappears and goes back to the bank account. Like, what good is all the money in the world if I can't actually use it to buy anything? Moral tale. All right. Anyway, you up for reading some commentary?
Okay.
Rashi to start, because he's always a good place to start.
He's commenting on each day, that day's portion. That means the portion that they needed for that day, but they shall not gather the portion that they need for the next day.
All right, so if we are workers, right, hunter-gatherers or farmers, we will gather as much as we can on a given day.
Sure.
Right. Why would we do that?
You don't know what'll be there tomorrow.
Exactly. Right? It's just good common sense. You gather everything you can now, and then that way you're sure that you have some left over tomorrow. Plus, it's simply more efficient, right? If I gather all the food I need today, then tomorrow I can do something else, right? If I go to the grocery shop one day a week, I don't have to go every single day to the grocery shop. That's one reason why the refrigerator was such an amazing invention as a time saver, even though people don't think of it that way. No longer had to go to the butcher and the grocer every single day like you did before the invention of the fridge. Okay.
And when he says whether they will follow my instructions, that means whether they will keep the commandments concerning the manna, that they not leave any over until morning, and that they not go out on the Shabbat to gather it.
All right, so Rashi says there were 2 tests that has to do with the manna. One was, don't leave any left over. Again, why might I leave a little bit left over?
Mm-hmm.
If I only got as much as I needed for today, why would I leave anything over? Because I'm not trusting that there's going to be any more tomorrow, right? If I have 3 cans of beans and it's a hurricane, I'm not going to eat all 3 cans of beans today. I'm going to ration myself just in case the grocery store isn't open tomorrow. when the manna came and it was new and they had already been complaining about lack of food, even though they said this will be enough for today and there'll be more tomorrow, they said, well, I'll eat a little of what I'm supposed to be eating today and I'll leave the rest for tomorrow just in case there is nothing tomorrow, and I'll ration myself, to make sure.
But it's also greedy. There's going to be a certain amount of greed that you go out and get as much as you can before someone else
I don't
gets
see it that way. When I earned money, my mother said, don't spend everything the first day you get it. Save some for another day. It's the right thing to do. It wasn't greedy. It was in case there was none tomorrow. You didn't spend everything you earned today and think, oh, I'll make more tomorrow.
Well, I think the idea of what you're going for is if you're gathering for your tent, but what is to be gathered is provided for the entire community, right? It's like one giant pot. Then if I take more than I need for today, because I'm worried about tomorrow or because I just want to eat more of this lovely stuff, then there is the potential that what I'm taking from a shared pot could now mean that someone else has less, right? When I work at my job, I'm not taking the money from anyone else, right? But if we all go to the same vegetable garden and this is one community vegetable garden and the sign on the door says everybody takes 5 tomatoes, and I say, well, I know someone else is probably going to take 6 tomatoes and then I won't get my tomatoes tomorrow. The incentive is to take more, right? This is the old classic political science economics discussion of the tragedy of the commons. Fishing hole, if you have a common pasture and it doesn't belong to any one person, then each person is incentivized to abuse the rights of that common property for their own benefit because they're worried someone else will do the same, and why should I let them abuse it when I can abuse it? And pretty soon the resource is totally destroyed.
And I'm thinking that if I were there, I'd want to make sure that I got enough so my children wouldn't be hungry either.
Which is what they're supposed to do, right?
Not that I'd be afraid that you would take it, but how do I know how much they're going to want? How much they're going to need?
You've been told.
I have no experience with this yet.
You've been told how much they're going to need, which is what we're going to get to, which is another side. Yeah.
Some people may, this is a whole new experience for these people. And some may still feel insecure and not have the confidence.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Which is part of the other layer of the psychological test, right? So there's the actual, the instructions test, and then there's the, do you follow the instructions because you actually understand yet? And that understanding is something that we're going to dwell on quite extensively. Yeah.
Almost like a hoarding mentality.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know how many people who grew up from the Great Depression that would spend much of their adult life always making sure that they had extra. I mean, the money stuffed in the mattress, the money in the back of the shoebox, always make sure there's a little extra, that you don't tell anyone about because you never know. And that was a very common psychological compensation for being deprived. And certainly these people were deprived as they went through their slavery. Right. Rashi's going to continue now commenting on verse 6.
Verse 6. Verse 6 says, by evening you shall know it was the Lord who brought you out from the land of Egypt. Because according to chapter 14, they already had faith in the Lord.
Right, which is the whole prologue to the Song of the Sea. Right. And now they believed in God and they believed in his servant Moses because they had seen, the whole splitting and the parting and the Exodus. Well, that was only 2 chapters ago. And now we're saying they don't really trust God. And this is needed to make them believe in God. What happened?
Because apparently many of them didn't actually know the truth. Because they said in verse 3 that it was Moses and Aaron who had brought them out of Egypt.
Right. Now, remember when we were discussing the idea of Pharaoh hardening his heart or God hardening his heart. Remember, one of the commentaries said that there is always an element in any miracle that allows somebody who wants to disbelieve to disbelieve. Right? No miracle is so incontrovertible that it will absolutely skeptic into a true believer just by itself. There is always an escape clause. And apparently, some of the Israelites were using the escape clause and saying, maybe it wasn't really God who brought us out of Egypt. Maybe it was these 2 guys. And they were the architects of our escape. And when this new miracle happens, that's supposed to alleviate that problem. Wouldn't be able to provide the man and wouldn't be able to provide the quail. What's the problem, by the way, with that? There's still an escape clause. And of course, the people can still wake up tomorrow morning and say, oh, well, you probably knew this was going to happen. You knew this was the season for quail. You knew this was the type of food that appears out in this wilderness. Right? Because, after all, Moses lived out here. Well, a little bit further away, but he knew this area a lot better than they did. So, miracles as a foundation for faith is if you choose to believe, you don't actually need the miracle. And if you choose to disbelieve, the miracle is not going to convince you. Onward now for Ramban, who is going to, of course, disagree with Rashi, as he often does.
And he says Rashi's comment is incorrect. He subjected you to the hardship of hunger and then gave you manna to eat, which neither you nor your fathers had ever known, in order to teach you on bread alone, but that man may live on anything that the Lord decrees.
So this is the summary that Moses is giving in Deuteronomy. And Ramban is saying by the summary, we can understand what this was meant to teach 40 years prior.
The test, they would go into a place where they had no food and no idea how to get any, where they were dependent on something they were totally unfamiliar with, of which they could get no more than a day's worth at a time.
Right. So putting all of this together, Ramban says that was the real test, right? It wasn't whether they would gather on Shabbat or whether they would leave anything over. It's follow. Or would they turn around after being afraid of running out of food and say, I'm not eating that stuff. Who knows if that's going to be here next week? It doesn't even last a day, right? I'm back to Egypt. Slavery is better than this. That, says Ramban, was the test.
And as Deuteronomy 8 says, the long way that the Lord your God has made you travel in the wilderness these past 40 years, that he might test you to learn what was in your hearts, whether you would keep his commandments or not. God could have led them by way of the local cities. Instead, he led them through the great and terrible wilderness until, with its set of serpents and scorpions, provide them with manna, and they would believe in him forever.
He deliberately orchestrated the circumstance so that they would know what dependence on God felt like, and also what reliance on God meant, that it was successful. By the more normal routes, the coastal cities, it wasn't just a question of, the trip would have been more dangerous because of armies, because obviously God could have helped that, but they wouldn't have had this experience. It's kind of like if you've ever taken a family vacation, sometimes you don't always want to go 5-star, right? Sometimes you want to take the back road. Sometimes you want to not book everything in advance so that you and your family will know, right? There are ways to handle difficult situations.
It's even a more complex test than that. Because if God had given them everything,
right,
for everything that they possibly needed,
the intravenous man, as we talked about,
exactly, then he would have taken away their independence, their ability to work for a living.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go out and gather little flakes of food each day, that takes a lot of work. It probably took them a couple hours to do that, to get enough for each of their dependents in their hut.
And there was an important lesson that eventually, when the man stops, after they leave the wilderness and go into the land of Israel, they're going to have to be working forever. Right? This is a temporary situation.
But paradox of what you just said is, on the other hand, they then have a guaranteed source of food every day.
Unlike your farmer, unlike your regular hunter-gatherer.
They have a guarantee. They know exactly where. Once this gets established, they have guaranteed food. They know where it's going to be there.
That's why I said it's complex.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to depend on God.
Right.
Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. It's both.
Right. It's not simple. It's not cut and dry. It's very, very multi-layered.
And I was just listening and going on what you said, but I was listening last night to a conversation on community transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the things that they were saying, is that there has to be like this 3-step process. Immediately after disaster, yes, you need to give people things.
Right.
But then you need to transition them into knowing how to help themselves,
Mm-hmm.
even if you're providing all the materials, but making them gather it. So that the third step is being able to work
Be self-reliant.
independently.
Exactly. Right. The sweat equity, if you will. All right. Now, Barbanel is going to take a slightly more pragmatic approach to this.
It only came in daily portions to keep them from making it a commodity.
I mean, think about it, right?
I'm gonna go into the manna business.
Why not? I'll go out and I'll gather, rather than gathering enough for myself, I'll gather twice as much, and then I can sell a little for extra.
Yeah, then I don't have to go out and gather. I'll just
Right.
buy it from you.
Right. And then that whole idea is in fact how our economy works in the modern
You
world.
have some gold that you brought out.
Right. It's you do one job, I do another job, and we pay each other or trade each other. And that way we each get more than we would have if we each had to do the same job that the other person was also doing, right? That diversification of the economy is a major, major stepping point, and God is against it here.
And as I used to teach my kids, and it teaches us to cooperate. You gather some stuff for me,
Right.
I pay you for something else.
And that's not happening here.
No.
Each person is responsible for their own.
Themselves.
And it's odd.
Yeah.
But it's also important because the mana was not about just establishing the right community. It was also about establishing the right individual spirit. On the Israelites, he wanted this one and this one and this one and this one and to each know and understand and have the right response.
But didn't it say, maybe I just misread, didn't it say that there were people who were gatherers
Well, for the tent,
for the whole?
think like the breadwinners, right?
Okay, so-
Somebody
so
for the
it
tent
wasn't
went out.
You had to gather your individual. Some people were.
Your family,
The
the family
By
provided
family.
for itself by family.
The wife and kids. The man went out and gathered for himself and his wife and children.
Or the wife, or the man and wife, or right.
They probably sent the,
Probably some of the kids.
right, because they didn't want to touch the that's good to go.
You're lower to the ground. You pick it up,
Yeah,
kids.
right.
All right. So a more later commentary.
The manna was a test of every single one to see whether or not he really feared God, to have any problems of sustenance, and still to fear God is a much greater test than to be poor and to believe in God.
It's counterintuitive, but we've seen it anecdotally over and over and over again, right? The faithful poor and the atheist wealthy. Because once you've got it made,
Yeah.
you assume you made it.
You may-
And if you don't have anything, then the only thing that can help you is God. And so it does often happen that once you're taken care of, you stop take care of you. And so he's saying, no, it was actually a test to see whether they be faithful because they were provided for. Faithful when they're not provided for. Sforno?
This will test them if, when receiving their food without effort, they will take care to keep my commandments, seeing that they will not have any excuses not to.
So Sforno sees that as a corollary, right? He says, all right, so, right, and all night, and you're constantly toiling, then yeah, you don't have much time to study, you don't have much time to do the other mitzvot. But if everything's taken care of with just a little bit of effort, if you've got all the food you can possibly have, you have protection and shelter, and everything is now fine, what are you going to do with your free time? Right?
Of forgetting God and your prosperity.
Exactly right. Exactly. But in this case, the prosperity isn't just about a full belly. It's also about an empty social calendar.
It's a reliable thing. It's so reliable, it's so predictable that you don't appreciate it.
Right. So you only have to work 40 hours a week, which is not much historically for what humans have had to work. Or, God bless you, you've retired from, your 9-to-5 type job. Use the time that you have that is in addition to the time that any of our ancestors would have been able to enjoy. Do you use it for something that is beneficial to yourself, to the world, to the fulfillment of the Torah's values? Or do you watch daytime TV? Right. No offense, I'm sure some of the programs are great, maybe. I just remember watching it when I was sick at home, and it's just nothing better to encourage you to get healthy than not to have to watch that anymore. Right. So this is the real test. For example, we have a Mishnah class that we have every Wednesday night. One of the first things I learned from my Mishnah teacher, Dr. Cohen, I believe Rabbi Cohen now, was he had a copy of a section of Mishnah, Masechet of Mishnah, that inside was stamped. It was from the 1800s of whatever small town in Poland's Wood Choppers Association. They had collectively purchased the copy of the Mishnah, and after they finished their days out in the forest cutting wood and bringing it in, they would sit and they would read Mishnah together in their shared book, right? Because no one of them could afford the book on their own because they were just woodcutters. But together they could actually purchase the book. Now you think of somebody who spends their entire day out chopping down trees in the middle of the forest and dragging them into the town and splitting them and sharing them with everything. And then when he finally finishes work, dreams of is being able to study a little Mishnah, right? And that is the level of dedication that Sforno was talking about here. If you were to now give that man a sack of gold, would he then say, Great, now I can study Mishnah all the time. Hopefully somebody who had been willing to chip in whatever his meager money was to buy a copy of the Mishnah would absolutely use the time. But with somebody who had always had free time, use their free time in such a devotional way. Something to think of, food for thought. All right, from the Gemara.
His disciples asked Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, how come the manna did not come down to the Israelites only once a year? He said to them, let me tell you a parable. To what is the manna to be compared? It is like a mortal king who has one son. He gave an allowance for him once a year, and the son greeted him only once a year.
Right, if Dad's going to hand me my sack of gold once a year, then I'll come and visit Dad once a year, get my sack of gold, and leave.
The father then went and gave him his allowance day by day, and the son greeted him every day.
Go figure.
Go figure.
Right? It's insight into human nature, right? If I only have to show up to get paid once a year, then I'm only going to show up to get paid once a year. You pay me each day, and I won't begrudge it, and I'll come each day. Now, for us in the modern world, obviously we don't live with manna. It might appear to be nice, but does that mean the concept of the manna and the lessons of the manna is totally absent from our modern life? Or I think we've already seen a number of parallels into how people think and how people behave in the modern world. We were actually, by tradition, given to read the section concerning the manna each and every day. It's part of a series of different sections that make up the preliminary prayers in our Siddur. This is before you get to the required stuff, the actual Shacharit section of the service in the morning. These are the warm-up passages. And we're going to read from Shulchan Aruch what these passages were, or are.
It is good to recite the passage of the binding.
That's the Akedah, that's the binding of Isaac for his almost sacrifice.
The passage of the manna.
Which is what we're talking about.
The 10 Commandments.
Everybody knows those.
The passages of the burnt offering in Leviticus.
Right.
The tribute offering, Leviticus. The peace offering, Leviticus. The sin offering, Leviticus. And the guilt offering.
All right, so these make up a section of the preliminary service in the Siddur. And we read them. They are recited each morning. And the Ramah adds, however,
but only in private is it permissible to recite the 10 Commandments each day. It is forbidden to recite them in congregation.
A little historical aside, commanded to recite the 10 Commandments publicly each and every day. It became a private-only activity because there were heretics who said the 10 Commandments were the only commandments. And they said, see, look, those are the ones they recite. They must be the only ones that matter. Our practice as proof, if you will, that the 10 Commandments were the only commandments. And so in order to take away fuel from their heresy, read them, but read them privately.
Because those are 10 out of 613, and no commandment is more important than any other. They're all equal.
Kinda.
Yes, kinda.
Individual circumstances
Yes,
may have a different ranking and priority, but yes, as far as
Yes.
being gifts from God of how to live our life, we should not disparage any one commandment more than another. However, Mishnah Berurah, which is a commentary on Shulchan Aruch, wants to make a very important point about this whole reading of passages behavior.
And it is not sufficient with mere saying, but rather he must understand what he is saying and recognize the wonders of God.
Right? So when we read from these passages, bing, next passage, bing. It's not just about having the words come out of your mouth or having the words appear before your eyes. You are supposed to understand what you are reading and not just comprehend the Hebrew, which is sort of a bare minimum, and you should be reading them in English if you can't read the Hebrew and understand them, but understand what the words mean, what the message of the words is. It's not just enough to have them appear before your eyes. All right, and he's going to point out another case where people might have mistakenly thought that reading in itself was enough.
And so too, that which they say in the Gemara, that anyone who says Ashrei 3 times every day is guaranteed that he'll be a resident of the world to come in this manner. And the reason for the saying all of this is as follows. Binding is in order to recall the merit of the forefathers every day, and also to humble his will, was self-sacrificing.
So when we read the Akedah, we remind ourselves of the good that our ancestors did and how that still is of benefit to us, And we also say, look, if Isaac was willing to give up of himself, I'd be willing to give up myself. I shouldn't be stingy with my spirit.
And the parsha of the manna is such that he will believe that all his food comes through special divine direction, as it is written, and the one who took more did not end up with more, and the one who took less did not end up with less. That increasing effort does not help at all.
Right? It wasn't just about who went out and worked more, because what did they get, each one of them? They got what they needed, right? Now, you can still get more than you need and to benefit from it because it's going to turn to rot by the next day, right? So what benefit was there to get more? Makes sense? And if the person who took less, the less that they took wasn't less than they needed. The less than they took was the less than what other people might have been gathering, but they still ended up with what they needed. And at the end of the day, no one had any leftover that was worthwhile, because anything left over was day. Makes sense? Right? There's a certain level of, once you have sustained yourself, everything after that is gravy.
And it says, you know, our food comes through special divine direction. I think that's still true. And we saw that hurricane come through here. It can destroy your crops. You know, and you got nothing.
Right.
You still have to pray that things will go well so that things will grow and we can have food.
Absolutely. Right. And once you've got a stocked fridge and a stocked pantry, more food can you eat? Well, that as a healthy level, right? There's only a certain amount that you need in order to sustain yourself.
And don't take it for granted. Know that it comes from
exactly
above as well.
Exactly right.
We still don't have that power.
No, we don't. Nor will we ever.
Nor will we ever. And it is found in
Yerushalmi, right? That's the so-called Jerusalem Talmud, as opposed to the Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud.
As the parsha of the manna, he is guaranteed that his livelihood will not decrease.
Now, it's sometimes misunderstood. There are people out there who say that if you recite the section of manna, right, you recite these passages, then you will have parnasa, right? You will have success in your livelihood. The Mishnah Berurah, what it's saying, not what the Gemara meant, not what the sages meant when they told us that we should recite these each day. What they meant was, if you recite it, you will understand where your parnasa comes from, where your sustenance comes from, and you will therefore direct your heart towards God. And in doing so, you will direct yourself in life, not ever come to complete, utter rack and ruin. Right? Does that mean you'll never have any problems? Of course you can still have problems, but you will always be sustained. The Israelites, they ended up having problems too, but they were sustained enough to make it through. It's not, these passages are not incantations. Right? These passages are not spells out of Harry Potter that if you recite them with no understanding, no comprehension, and no intention to follow the lessons and the messages of each one of them, that you'll somehow miraculously get the benefit. That's not the miracle of manna. The miracle of manna is what it taught us about our relationship with God. And if you miss that relationship and just say the words, you're getting zero benefit. Gym equipment, and then not using it. If only I own more self-help books. If only I own more exercise equipment. It doesn't work like that. You got to use the tool.
The Ten Commandments is in order to recall every day the standing by Mount Sinai and his strengthened. And the parsha of the sacrifices is because of what we say in Menachot. Zot Torah Chatat. Anyone who engages in the Torah of the Chatat sacrifice a Chatat, a sin offering.
Right. So we can't do the sacrifices, but we can have the same intentionality that our ancestors had when they brought a sacrifice by recalling the sacrifices with that same intentionality. The meaning was always the most important part, even when we had the temple. Right? When someone showed up and they brought a sin offering, the animal wasn't the important part. Will that brought the animal, that was the important part. There was the contrition, that was the important part. We'll keep those sacrifices and get all of the same benefit. Make sense? Right, so there's no such thing as a magic incantation, special spell, special passage that if you recite 13 times by the light of a full moon while swinging a dead cat over your head is going to guarantee you God's blessings. different parts of the Torah that our ancestors have found especially good for driving home messages. How you live your life so that your life will be better. Yes? Yes, I know. The one sells a lot more books. Right? It's much easier to convince people to just recite over and over again the mantra of mana. Somehow miraculously change their life. People read it, understand it, live it, and that'll change your life. Hard work. Changing gears, this more about how this mana was such a between our relationship between us and God.
Custom. One buys himself a servant so that his servant will bake bread for him and may eat. But I did not do so. Rather, though you are my servants, so that you might eat. And it's stated in Exodus, I will rain down bread from the heavens for you.
Just a beautiful image, right? Yeah. Normally, the cook's going to feed you.
Right.
This is to say, we became the avadim, we became the servants of God. For us, it's totally different from the human realm. God's God, as opposed to the way most mortals behave. And then Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel points out again how special this relationship is, as symbolized by the manna.
How beloved are Israel before the Lord. He changed the order of creation for them. He converted for them the terrestrial to the celestial, and the celestial to the terrestrial. Bread would rise from the earth, and dew would fall from the heavens. And now, with the manna, the order has been reversed. Fall from heaven, and dew to rise from the earth. And as it says, rain down bread for you from the heavens.
That also relates to the blessing that in Genesis, I bless you, the dew of heaven. We have this now being brought to fruition.
Absolutely.
It's
right.
being made visible. Way.
In a very tangible way, which was meant to be, as we can see from our ancestors, putting this as part of a preliminary reading for each day Shachari. An example is when we think about the manna, we are supposed to think about, we're not only supposed to think of how lucky they were that all they had to do was go out and gather a little bit and they had enough food, but oh, woe is me, I've got to be a farmer, I have to be a blacksmith, I have to be an accountant. Right? I think just as God provided for them in that manner, God still provides for me in this manner. Right? I still have an opportunity to sustain myself and to provide for myself and my family. As good of a miracle as the miracle of the manna itself was. And it is still as dependent upon God ultimately of, keeping me upright and taking nourishment as for them. Right? God sustains me now, and I can support my family just as God sustained us in the past with the manna.
I read in Genesis, it's for all generations.
Yes, it doesn't have an expiration date. Unlike the manna, which is...
That I like is when we say the blessing, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, who brings forth bread from the earth. But actually, bread, I've never seen it growing from the earth.
No.
It's the wheat. So we are now God's partners in doing this. He brings the wheat, we get it, and make bread together.
Yes. And throughout the Torah, there was that notion of partnership, that God sustains us and God gives us both strength, wisdom, and the raw materials to transform that. But in the process of transforming it, we have to remember what we are trying to transform it and ourselves into. Right? We are not bread-making machines. We are not meant to be only laborers. We are supposed to labor through God's blessings in order that our spirit is free to rise to new heights. And we're not supposed to just be cogs in a giant economic machine. That's what Pharaoh wanted us to be. We are supposed to still support ourselves, but we are supposed to reach beyond that support and look to the source of that support and learn even through our work who God is.
So isn't the man pretty much the same as in ours?
Absolutely.
Because you can't, plate by plate, but you have to make it in cakes and you have to
we find out indeed that it's ground up and they bake it and they use it. They don't just eat it raw off the thing.
like-
Although there is a midrash that says the righteous could eat it raw.
Oh.
The middle of the road people had to do a little preparation, and the wicked, they were the ones having to grind it in order to make it usable. But that's a great midrash. But
Like wheat.
good, very good. All right. Was man gluten